So, Jack,
Thank you.
why do you think Iowa can do this?
Well, we started our preparation for this, and as you can imagine, it's changed since we've listened to all the speakers. We have seen presenters come up with incredible inventions and ideas in a global sense, and our passion to get the changes needed so that we have a better planet and a better society. And yet, we know as much as we write about it and we talk about it, it's politics that's going to get it done. And if you look at what we're doing now in this country and around the world, it is not a predictable kind of process to put any kind of investment in. So what we've decided, what we've done in the past 3 or 4 years in Iowa, is try to get the idea of a digital democracy, get ready to inform the electorate. Because as everybody has said as they've come up on the stage, is that it's going to take the people to make the changes. So let's get the people to speak. And yet, we say why and how can we do that? Well, Iowa can do it for 2 reasons. One, I want you to know that we are a renewable state. We've talked about California and Texas with windmills. One of your speakers correctly identified Iowa as the 2nd largest generator of windmill electricity in the country. You had Tom Vilsack here last year, the former governor of Iowa and the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. I'm sure he talked about that. So we understand and we know it's at stake. Secondly, the thing is Iowa, the presidential caucuses. Iowa is described as a flyover state. Well, 24 candidates for president are landing in Iowa all the time. And they know that they can get their message presented and dialogue can be created in the small towns in Iowa, in the coffee shops, in the big arenas as well. And so Iowa has this idea that it can actually be a laboratory of democracy, that we can test things. So instead of having politicians come to us and tell us what they're going to do, we're at the stage now that there have been numerous organizations that have been telling the presidential candidates what they want. There's a joke that I use that in 1988, Governor Babbitt from Arizona was running for president. And he invited me down to Arizona to meet with some of his constituents and supporters. And I made the observation that when presidential candidates come into the room, everybody stands up. But to a presidential candidate, when an Iowan walks into the room, the presidential candidate stands up. And that's the kind of focus that we have. And so we're going to be talking about how we can create a system through the platforms that we're going to be talking about, create a system in which we can take the political expediency that our politics is based on now, politicians saying anything to get a headline, to try to get 2 or 3 more percentage points in the poll, to issue-based activism. And so what we're going to be talking about is how we turn that into something that is not only worthwhile for the immediate attention of our politicians, but has a long, sustainable opportunity to build an agenda that we can decide and vote on, and really, in the greatest sense of democracy, start changing the world. So I'm going to pass you on to Merlin, who came to me when I was running for governor. I was the Democratic candidate for governor in 2014. And this guy comes into my office and he talks to me, and I said, well, why don't we get together after the election? We'll have a great discussion. Well, we did have that great discussion. It just wasn't in the governor's office, but it's now in front of you. Merlin.
Thanks, Jack. Do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think the key thing that comes out of this is how tired people are of transient promises. So, what change can be made that can be really sustainable? And I know that that's really been at the heart of your planning.
Yeah, so let me tell you a little story. We all love stories, and so you understand how I got back to Iowa, because quite frankly, I left right out of college. I started a publishing business, and when I saw it was going to take off, I moved to Boulder, Colorado. So I'm here today with mixed emotions. I love Colorado, and I'm probably coming back, at least to have a place. But I moved to Boulder, spent the bulk of my adult life in Boulder, in Colorado. Left in 2004, went further west. Where do you go? You know, you go to California, right? And ended up in Northern California and thought that's where I was going to hang up my spurs. I then got an invitation to go back and work with Governor Branstad back in 2010 when he made a decision that he wanted the Iowa schools to be #1 again, which is where they were when I graduated from high school in the mid-'60s. And spent a year working with the Department of Education. It went nowhere, so it got political. They would not fund anything, so it was really a political ploy more than anything. But I was now back there. The next thing that the governor wanted to do, he wanted to make Iowa the healthiest state. And that was his second, my second business actually was in the water business, and we created a water-based wellness system. And so looking at Iowa, and one of the things that I had discovered going back to Iowa is, first of all, it was not the state that I left. In fact, I couldn't even recognize it. The water quality, the way they do agriculture, the disease, the education system. I found out that the average child in Iowa schools, that roughly, or let me say this a little bit differently. When I graduated from high school, 4% of the kids in Iowa schools had a chronic disease. Anybody want to guess what you think it is now in Iowa? How many kids have a chronic disease in our schools?
24.
16.
24, 15?
16.
50?
16.
Pretty close, 46% of the kids in Iowa schools have a chronic disease. That is totally unacceptable. What's causing that? And I'm going to segue from that into what was presented here in the previous panel, because they were suggesting that to fix the climate change, which is obviously on all of our minds, we got to fix democracy. And I'm going to suggest that is true. But if we want to fix democracy, we have to fix health care, because the people are sick. Iowa's not unique in those statistics that I presented. And as I was looking, I got put onto the Healthiest State Committee, and I was looking at why are we going backwards rather than forwards? We have this initiative, and we're spending a lot of money to try to get people healthy. Why are we going backwards rather than forwards? When I started looking into it, I realized that we got water quality issues. We can't get healthy if there's toxins and contaminants and literally poisons in our water. Where's that contaminated water coming from? It's coming from contaminated soils. The soil is dead in Iowa. It used to be very alive when I lived there. And if you're growing food in dead and toxic soil, what do you come up with? Toxic food that you're feeding the people and or the animals that you're raising. So to fix the climate issue, we have to fix democracy. We have to fix healthcare. That means we have to fix education, and we've got to educate people about these issues that we've been talking about for the last 2 days. That means we've got to fix energy. We're doing a pretty good job, as Jack said, on energy in Iowa, so we're leading there. But ultimately, it then comes back to fixing politics. And that's what we've set out to do. And as a result of meeting him, I saw him working at the top and me working at the bottom. A bit emotional. Obviously a heartfelt issue. I have no idea why this is happening, but
Because you're passionate, man.
anyway, that's what we're doing in Iowa. And to kind of cut to the chase, we've got the next 6 months
to send a message to the rest of the country of what needs to be done. And so when all is said and done, we're going to invite everybody in this room that has been at this conference to join with us in Iowa and bring a model back to Colorado that will accelerate even more of the great things that Colorado is doing and take our country back. And please take it up.
Before we pass it on, this is why I listen to this guy. Now you have to, in politics, when you win, you have a whole agenda. When you lose, you kind of go backward. Well, I wasn't going to go backward, and I'm doing more things in Iowa than I possibly should do. This is a guy that gave me this story about a belief that we could change the system if we educate and inform the population. So this whole process here is a bottom-up approach. It's a digital approach. How do you do this? Well, that's why Joe and Tracy are here, because they're taking their digital platform that we're taking for granted in the social media environment, and we're going to start teaching Iowans about the issues, and they're going to start teaching the politicians.
And I would also say it's really important to be able to be broken and broken open and to be passionate, because that lets that energy out. And I think a lot of people are feeling broken and are wanting a voice for that brokenness and a mechanism for expressing it. And I think, Joe, you're building a platform where you're wanting to gather voices and interpret them and create systems and projects that will actually serve and serve to assuage that I think hurt that people are feeling.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, bringing voice to the community is really what it's all about. I also play music, and I've followed a lot of different acts before, but to follow that act, Merlin, it's going to be challenging for me. But where we are in our process is we're doing a lot of work in Iowa to really engage the communities from the ground up. We're taking pretty much a big data approach to local activism and trying to give people a voice and working with local organizations, local governments, and really kind of taking what we do in California and in the Bay Area where our agency is and our technology development is, to really understand the nuances from a social data standpoint. I have a graphic here. Is that gonna magically appear? Look at that. Their technology is working for us. So Merlin came to us through Sally, which thank you so much for Sally Rainey to having us here. And so basically what we're trying to do in Iowa and what we're doing in Iowa is we're basically involving local communities and the community outreach via social and data technologies to basically build activism on a local level. Now, what that means basically is that we're working with local government organizations to basically understand the programs that they're wanting to introduce into their local constituents or local people, while at the same time helping them do that via informational social campaigns, data campaigns, that sort of a thing. We were in Iowa, Newton, Iowa, a couple weeks ago, and we were meeting with the local government groups, and they were telling us how they're doing this really cool program with the parks downtown. And one of the young gentlemen was telling me how he's like, yeah, we're collecting all this great data. I'm like, well, that's awesome. How are you guys doing that? He's like, oh, well, we have 2 college students taking shifts to watch, see how many people are walking into the park. And I was like, well, what kind of information? Yeah, we're creating a spreadsheet. I'm like, well, what about using social media? And here you've got 20-year-olds who are on their phones all the time, but they didn't really take the connection of understanding that the social platforms that they use to entertain themselves are actually those same platforms that they can use to galvanize the population and the people into action. And so we're working on a lot of really great projects, and I think, you know, Mr. Timothy Worth, who was here before us, was talking about, you know, the grassroots level and really trying to organize from the bottom up to create a movement. So I know we have limited time today. I can get into a lot of data conversations. We can get into a lot of further conversations about our technology and our crowdfunding. But if you take one thing away, our goal is to basically work with local communities to build the messages that mean something to them that then in turn galvanize them into action. So Thank you so much.
And let me just add to that, now that I've gotten a little bit of my composure back here, sorry about that. What we're doing is a 99 county 100 initiative to do this, because we're going to show the rest of the country that you can take an entire state and do what Joe is describing within the political boundaries that Jack understands, and bring a lot of people to the table. So it's a statewide initiative, and here again, we've been at this a number of years. We've got a lot of the foundation in place, and the next 6 months are really, really very critical for us. We're going to be talking to Tom Steyer tonight. We want him at the top. He recently got my vote. In fact, last Sunday when he was in Iowa speaking at the Iowa State Fair, when he said, on the first day of my presidency, if you elect me, I will declare a climate emergency. Yes. That got my vote. And we're going to be talking about at him today, because he's going to be working at the top. He's going to bring in, he's got $100 million, as we all know, that he's committed to this. Well, we're going to raise another $100 million at the top, and that's just the start, so that we can do this across the state, and then, of course, take it from state to state, so that we can, in fact, take our democracy back. And I'll turn it back to him.
Thanks, Merlin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Merlin. So my name's Tracy, and I really am a grassroots motivator and facilitator. My interest is really in figuring out how we can get back to the people and understand what they really care about. Because if you listen to the statistic that Merlin shared about the children, that's just, there's nothing good about that. When people don't feel good, they don't act and behave appropriately. They come from fear and they make, stupid mistakes. That's not who they truly are. We want to get to the heart of the matter, and we need individuals like yourself and these different politicians to come in and understand what it takes to really motivate people. One of our, core topics here is bringing the voice back to individuals. How do we do that? One thing that we started doing in my agency at the executive leadership level, and it was really interesting, and it was an experiment working with different executives, was we started asking the question, what do you care about? And I could see the physiology, the change in their face, because they're not really asking those questions. Now, my background is in human biology. I studied physical therapy. I was working for all the medical conglomerates in the Bay Area in the 90s when managed care came about, and it was really sad. I actually left the field and I went into technology. I went into medical devices, and we were teaching Walter Reed how to, about teleradiology. So we were helping soldiers out in the field. It later went into 3D medical imaging. And I carried that torch of disruptive technology on and on, but about 5 years ago, I got lost, in the technology and in the science, because even though it was helping people, I wasn't connected to what really mattered to people. And so we're bringing that back as this team to get to the grassroots, and we're going to utilize the technology, but we're not going to overlook what really matters to people, because it really, when our planet's not well, people are not well, we are not going to get positive change when that's happening. So I'm just going to keep it simple and real, and that's the message. Please go back out into your community and to your family even, and ask, what do you really care about? Stop asking, what would you like or what do you want? That's effective too. It's very effective in different modalities. But let's get to the heart of the matter. And I want to thank Sally Rainey, because she's really an inspiration, and that she really brings the heart. And thank you so much, Sally. We love you so much.
We do.
And, really. So anyway, back to Senator Jack. Thank you.
Just before we go to you, Jack, can I just come back to the tech platform and the data? Because there is so much data being collected. Now in Europe, there's a huge backlash against that. We now have legislation, GDPR, about the amount of data you can capture and what you can use it for.
Sure.
And you don't have that same restriction here, but of course it may come. So it's going to be really critical that people feel they can trust the platform sufficiently to give up their data. And then the second piece of that is, and it might be something that you want to speak to, Merlin, is actually ensuring that there is an outcome from giving up your data.
Right.
Because there have been so many promises. How can you make sure that it's sustainable because you deliver something from that? And that's probably brings in the fundraising piece.
So we've developed a custom white label platform. What that means is that we can basically create the feature sets that are within it, from whether it's aggregating data, sharing messages, or actually crowdfunding via our AI technologies that we've built into the system specifically for our community. So that means that everyone's familiar with GoFundMe and Kickstarter, right? Okay, maybe some of you have created campaigns. Every time you create a campaign, you put all your effort, all your time into that effort to try to get everyone behind your message and help you support whatever cause you're building. What we're talking about doing is, and what we're doing in Iowa and in other locations, is creating an Iowa for Iowa platform or a Newton, Iowa platform where all of the people that are in that community are working together to support and understand what's going on within their community. That model then enables them to understand the data from a personal standpoint. So, for example, you may not know the person down the street. You may not know your neighbor that's right next door. But if you're able to actually create an opportunity where you can tell stories, engage that community, understand that your data and that your information and that the way you're interacting with data is actually supporting the community you're in, you're changing the conversation on a local level. That then galvanizes the support that you need to then have events and other things that are more cohesive, as opposed to all of these organizations and all these individuals living in their own silos in their own town. We're trying to bring people together, understand the message that means the most to them, and then galvanize them into action. So it speaks to that. I'm happy to talk more about it after the panel, because I know we have only so much time.
If I could add to that, we've all heard the saying that all politics is local. Well, let's make it local. We say that, and there's some truth to that, but we don't act like that in our communities because, quite frankly, we don't know a lot of our community anymore. So it is time to get personal, quite frankly, and then get local so that we can sustain the global that we're all talking about here. So that's what we're going to do in Iowa, and we've got 900 cities in Iowa. We're going to address 100, obviously, the bigger ones, but we're going to be we're going to be connecting them through a social, a digital, and a communal platform, so that we're going to be doing these kinds of conversations in our community, because there's only so much you can do on the internet, and then it's time to get personal and be able to look people in the eye and know who you're really communicating with, and see them break down, as you saw me, and what is really important to them and what their concerns are, and how you can work together and help each other. So that's the luxury that we have in Iowa. And fortunately, I ran into this guy who was on the same page, and he's connected politically as you're going to get, with the exception of maybe the governor. But he's hung in here, and now we're going to use his political power to do what we're trying to do not only around the country but around the world. And so here again, join us in Iowa. We'd love to have you come visit us along with all these other presidential candidates, and build a model for not only for Iowa, but obviously for the rest of the country.
And to that note, if you have not been to Des Moines, it is fabulous. I just went last month, and it's just a perfect town. And this is where these guys are from. It's a great place, so please go visit Iowa.
If I could kind of end this by acknowledging that we talk about a digital democracy, the Iowa Democratic Party is proceeding with that now. The caucuses are not a primary. In a primary, like in a general election, you go and vote. You have all day to vote, you cast your vote, you leave. With a caucus, you go to a place, a church, a school, a building, and you join your neighbors in your political caucus, in your precincts, and you choose your preference for president. So you're actually meeting at 7 o'clock at night, and it's gone well, right? We've sifted out some of the best candidates from the others. But now, how about the people who work at night? How about the people who are at our home? How about the military that aren't here? What do you do with those Iowans? They're not participating. They don't vote. However, the Iowa Democratic Party said, we're going to use the digital democracy, this new platform, and we're going to allow them to call in 7 times during prior to the caucus, and they can cast their vote for a presidential candidate. That's the beginning of a digital democracy. That is just the elementary form of what we're talking about. You take that into this whole new platform that Joe and Merlin and Tracy have been talking about, and you start inviting people to give us their passion about their issues. You're not talking about just fighting dark money. You're fighting dark money by getting people you want elected, by having a riot of commitment from the people in your communities and your neighborhoods. And believe me, that's the only way we're going to get this democracy back.
Here, here.